Ooh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you dream of once in a love
Well, hello, and welcome to the second very special episode of Over the Rainbow. I'm Mark Silverman, and my co-host is
Sharon Yankowicz. Good to see you again, Mark.
Hey Sharon. How you doing? You got your notes there and everything. You all
Good.
set?
I do. I do. I'm all set up. I learned, mostly, you know some things about these people, but when you do a little bit more, it becomes really interesting learning more. I mean, with Peter
Well,
Bogdanovich, you kind
let's not get ahead of ourselves because
no, I just wanted to say, not to get ahead of ourselves, but you know the name, instantly a movie or two, which is why you recognize the name. But then when you go and you look into a person's background, you go, oh, wow. So um, that's just really, if I like it, I like the research. I like being informed about these different people's lives and what that lends to what we're doing.
this is true. One of the reasons we do this show is because it allows us to share, learn and share some insight into people who both have been famous and perhaps should have been famous, or they're famous and we
Right.
don't always know why they're famous. Um, One of the things that makes this such a special episode, it's really the first time we're going to be breaking up the show into two separate episodes this week, and
It's unfortunate.
well,
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that that many people had passed away in succession that we had. Maybe
I'm glad you said that because the fact is that there are always people that are passing away, people of significance, and even breaking this into two shows, we are certainly not going to talk about all the people who perhaps we could have, and I don't want that to be taken as a judgment call by
right,
us on who is worthy and who isn't. Um,
right.
it's really very, I mean, for me, the selection becomes very subjective. It's who resonates with you and with me at a particular time and why, who has, whose life do we think maybe resonates with today's issues, allows us to talk about
Well,
things that are,
right, and who, and maybe someone whose name isn't a household word, but people might go, oh, that, you know, they would be glad to learn about said person.
yeah. And I think one,
Right.
by the way, if things play out right, we'll also have our first guest joining us in the second episode later this week. Uh,
Right.
but there's a lot for us to talk about, a lot of material, and today, as you mentioned, we're going to be talking about Roman Polanski. We're going to be talking about Sidney Poitier, Lani Guinier, who I think probably falls into that category you were just mentioning. Somebody people
Of
should know more
people who
about.
we should, right.
Um, and then we're going back, oddly enough, we're going back to football with Dan Reeves
Yeah.
and Don Maynard. Uh, the second episode, just so people don't think we forgot, Bob Saget will obviously be the main topic of our next episode, uh, along with a couple of others that
Yeah, Josh Gilman, who's another one of those people who probably really regarded well within his industry, but not so much a household name. But once we get into him, people will go, oh, kind of thing, which is also kind of what this is about. Oh, I know who that is, or I know his work. So, yeah.
And then we'll cover James Mtume and the passing of Jay Weaver, right?
Yeah, both in the music industry and in their own way, having an impact on the direction that music is heard.
Well, I don't know how much of the music we're going to be talking about with Weaver, but that's getting
Right.
ahead
Well,
of ourselves here.
right.
Let's start with Peter Bogdanovich. It's funny that you mentioned about the name, and what's strange to me was it's a name I know. I've known some of his work, and I have to admit I always kind of in my mind conflate him with Roman Polanski. Maybe it's because of the Eastern European roots for both the names and all of that. But
Right.
as we were looking, as I was going through the research, there were a couple of parallels that surprised me.
Uh-huh.
Roman Polanski.
Well,
Yeah.
well, of course. I mean, the thing that surprised me was I did not know that Bogdanovich was actually born here in the States.
Mm-hmm.
He actually was born in Kingston, New York. And I kind of knew about his Serbian roots, but his mother was actually a wealthy Australian that came from a very wealthy Jewish family. And what brought them to New York was fleeing the Nazis. That's pretty relevant, I think. And it just shows to show you, again, somebody who had very humble beginnings, and where that led them.
Oddly enough, Judaism is going to have something of a theme throughout today's show, at least through the first half of it, I think, in some surprising ways. What's your take on Bogdanovich's career in general, as you learned about it?
Well, it seems to me like, from what I learned, he was somewhat a prodigal. I mean, in some ways, he was referred to as a wonderkin, which that word wonderkin made me think of Spielberg, because Spielberg also was, when he first came out and was coming up, was considered a wonderkin. And again, Spielberg has had his flops, and so has Bogdanovich. I had did not know that he studied with he was an actor first, and he studied with a legendary teacher by the name of Stella Adler. And his first professional acting was, in fact, in Summer Stock, which, when you look at the beginning of many actors and actresses, they've all done Summer Stock. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Then he was he had gotten a job at MoMA, and gained great notoriety for programming movies at MoMA. I knew MoMA had, obviously art, that's what it's about, right, but I did not even know they showed movies at MoMA.
He was also a well-established writer early on, which got him a lot of attention. And I actually think that ties in with the WonderCon thing. You mentioned Spielberg. Then there's Pulp Fiction.
Right. He actually he had he had built his reputation as a film writer with articles of all things Esquire magazine, and I don't know, when I was growing up, I mean, I never actually picked up a copy of it, but you see it in the stands, or
Yeah.
like you're in the doctor's office. And I always thought of Esquire sort of as like the male version of a Playboy magazine type thing. So
The
I didn't,
male version
and
of
then
Playboy.
yeah, I thought so.
I mean,
Evidently,
Playboy
I
is
was
a
wrong with that assumption. Yeah, because you'll always get those guys that say, "Oh, I read it for the articles." I mean, apparently, there was some very good articles in Playgirl magazine. So, um, you know, I just thinking, yeah, or no, maybe I'm mixing it up with GQ.
yeah, maybe that. But what I'm
Um,
saying is Quentin Tarantino, Spielberg were noted
yeah,
film nuts growing up.
yeah,
So was Bogdanovich.
Bogdanovich. Yeah, like I think I had read he used to watch over like 400 movies or some insane amount
And
like that.
catalog and review and catalog them for his own use.
Yep.
Uh, he watched a massive amount of movies all through his growing up, and it was through his writing that he connected with Roger Corman. I think at a MoMA event, but
Uh-huh.
Corman immediately invited him to essentially launched him as a director, a writer and director. And I almost
Yeah, I
get to
think
work against Bogdanovich because, yes, where you mentioned that Spielberg had his share of failures, I think Spielberg was throughout his career has been more consistently successful.
absolutely. Hmm.
As has Quentin Tarantino been more consistently successful, and in a way,
Agree again.
I think Bogdanovich had his very early success with it, which his first few films, Paper Moon, obviously, probably being the top.
Yeah,
The last picture show?
and his first, I mean, a lot of people may not know about a movie called Targets. Um, but when I was reading about it, I was thinking, I wonder if I can get my hands on that movie because it sounded really interesting. It was his first directed movie. It was very low budget, and it was a movie called Targets, and it was a crime thriller, which is like my thing. I love that sort of thing, and it was like a story about a parallel universe that's all very like Twilight Zoney, like all right in my wheelhouse. He also interviewed Orson Welles and became lifelong friends with Orson Welles. There's a big name for you. So that was surprising to find out. And then you go back into when he was 32 years old, he directed The Last Picture Show, which was the first thing I thought of when I heard he passed away. So that was in 1971. And that's what sort of dubbed him the Wonderkin that I had mentioned before.
But I almost think that the directing opportunities came too easy to him. They would drop in his lap where he didn't pay the traditional dues. So that I think that's why he perhaps was not able to sustain the success. But he spent.
And that wasn't the right. That wasn't the thing that I think derailed him was more his personal life. Sometimes it's hard to separate your personal life from your work life, and he cheated on his first wife, who was given a lot of acclaim for the woman behind the man type thing. And when he cheated on her with, I think it was Sybil Shepherd, they divorced. Like there was all kinds of gossip, and immediately his name sort of took a tumble.
I don't know. You think Hollywood really gets judgmental on divorce and
back in those days? Certainly.
I don't think so. I don't think he ever did. And he did have a sustained many-year relationship.
You had Heather Hopper, and and people who were just famous for
gossip,
just reporting that.
but I don't think it would derail a career. You know,
From right, well, from what I was reading, you know, just not having the support of his first wife, just really, he never recovered from that, from what I was
that goes back
reading
to,
about
to,
that.
to the coincidence that I found that surprised me with Polanski, because Polanski, besides his direct stuff, was married to Sharon Tate when Sharon Tate was
Mhm.
killed. And now he is in exile because he had relations with underage women. Well,
Oh,
Peter
yeah.
Bogdanovich was involved with Dorothy Stratton when she was killed
Yes.
by her ex-husband, Playboy
Right.
model, very probably a poor man's Sharon Tate, actually, because I don't know Stratton all that well, but Tate, aside from a beauty, had tremendously good acting chops. I think Stratton's
Mhm.
acting chops maybe at that early stage were more as a result of her notoriety, Playboy cover, looks, etc.
Right.
But then Bogdanovich is said to have had some sort of relationship with Stratton's younger sister, who was in her early teens. So
Yes.
I just find it interesting that I always conflated the two, and then there are all these similarities, oddly enough.
How about that?
But
Yeah.
you mentioned his Orson Welles links
Yeah.
and biography. I think that also comes back to his roots, because in addition to staying in the industry for decades and decades as an actor, as a writer, as a director, although I don't think he ever had the same.
I believe he was
success.
also, yeah, I believe he was also a photographer.
But he also wrote. He
Yeah.
Girl, stop. He wrote and covered books on some of the all-time greats. Buster
Yes.
Keaton.
Oh, okay, that's the
Ford,
name. Yeah, I love
Alfred
Buster Keaton.
Hitchcock. So he
Mhm.
spent his life basically cataloging and glorifying the people he grew up, or even, I mean, Buster
Watching.
Keaton would have
Yeah.
been before his time. Buster Keaton is somebody who, from the early days of the silent films, Charlie Chaplin days and earlier, should be way
Yeah.
more famous than he is. And Bogdanovich did his part to keep Buster Keaton.
The name's prevalent. Yeah.
And I think he spent his life getting to, that was his work. And he had success, even if he wasn't as prolonged the successful directors. I think
Wasn't that, didn't he do that along the same time that he was with MoMA?
I think
Or
he
was that
discovered
after?
later. I mean,
Or was it later?
Buster was in 2018, directed.
No, I meant the cat. I don't mean that. I mean the cataloging.
Oh, well, that was, I think that was all through his youth also. I think that's through his childhood and teenage years.
Gotcha.
That was just something that he truly was invested in, and he got to work. He not only influenced, but he got to work with a lot of the directors that followed in his footsteps, and that also had. I didn't see him having worked with Spielberg, but I wouldn't be surprised
He
if
didn't.
he did.
No, he didn't. I just sort of correlated the Wonderkin moniker. Just reminded me of that same sort of path when Spielberg was coming up. So for all we know, Spielberg could have been following in some way. He when he's been interviewed, he largely talks about Hitchcock as the person that he most related to. But coming up, he probably also looked a lot at Bogdanovich's work. One movie that he directed that I was unaware of, and I love this movie, is What's Up, Doc, with Barbara Streisand. It's a very different movie from the others that he had directed, and it's a hysterical movie. I love that movie. So it was a kind of aha moment to find out that he had anything to do with it.
Well, he also worked in television, sometimes as character, very often cameos as himself in The Sopranos,
Yeah,
in The Simpsons. Oddly enough, I didn't realize this. He did an episode of How I Met Your Mother, although I doubt that he crossed paths with Bob Saget, who we'll talk about
right,
in the next episode.
right.
Bob Saget,
I didn't know
voiceover in How I Met Your Mother. You know, it's funny. I just get the feeling that Bogdanovich, looking back at his own career, would have felt like he could have done more, should have done more, that he got
without a doubt
of everything.
Yeah.
But he got to live his life and in the industry that he loved and associated with The Sopranos. And I mean,
I know. Well, that came after his last movie hit, which oddly enough was The Mask in 1985. And then he really couldn't, as hard as he tried, he couldn't even get anybody to hire him as a director. So he went back to acting. And sort of how
The Mask credit. That wasn't the Jim Carrey movie, though, was it?
I don't think so. I think that was a Cher movie. I think. Right. Yeah. So no, it wasn't that. That I like Jim Carrey, but that was a ridiculous movie. But yeah, he went back to acting, and that's sort of what led him back to those roles on The Sopranos in 1999. So he kept himself going. You know, it really shows you how in life you have to keep sort of reinventing yourself.
The other one is probably the most important or high profile person that we're talking about this week is Sidney Poitier.
Yeah.
And something he had in common with Bogdanovich is he wanted to be an actor from early stage.
Very young. I think he was 12 when he saw his first movie. Yep.
All he worked towards and paid his dues.
Without a doubt. I really dove into I'm a very, very big Sidney Poitier fan from very young myself. And that one kind of hit me, you know, and I did not realize, that was reverse from Bogdanovich, where I thought Bogdanovich was an immigrant, which he wasn't, his parents were. I thought Poitier was an American, and he was not.
Actually, he was. He was.
He was?
That's very surprising.
That's right, because she was pregnant. She was pregnant and then didn't have him until they got here.
He was born 3 months premature while his family was visiting Florida from, I think it was Haiti. So he was automatically an American citizen at birth. Even though he wasn't American by upbringing, I do think he was then raised back in Haiti before returning, or the Bahamas before returning. Yeah, he grew up in the Bahamas before returning to the U.S., but he was born here. So his citizenship was never in question.
True. True. I stand corrected. or I sit corrected. I mean, obviously my first movie where I fell in love with him was To Serve with Love, which was followed by Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which were both very, I think, both award-winning movies, very much acclaimed if they didn't win the Oscar, or I did not see any notes to awards that it won, but just very dynamic with his words and the way that he illustrated he dove into his parts. And one thing that I had come across was a quote. I'm looking for the quote. One quote that I came upon was Sidney Poitier was a movie star who burned bright enough to change the world. And that resonated with me because he certainly did change the world in the way that the public viewed Black actors. So he, given the time that he was growing up and how slavery and how the Negro man was treated in the South, which he experienced from living in Florida. He did not adjust well to living in Florida, but he grown up in a farm in the Bahamas, and worked on a farm with his brothers and sisters, loved fishing. And when he was 11, they moved to Nassau, where he saw his first movie. And I'm right, he was 12. And he went to school in one of these little like prairie of the, was it, what's that, what's the TV show with Laura Ingalls?
Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, like when you used to watch them go to school in the schoolhouse.
Yeah.
Like he actually went to school like in that sort of setting. It's like, wow, when he was 12, he dropped out because his family was so poor. He actually went to get like manual labor, and because he was so tall, they didn't ask him how old he was. So again, very, very humble beginnings.
Actually, he was able to lie about his age and enlist in World War II because he was so tall. Although he did not.
Yeah, he didn't last long. He did not last long. He actually did that because he was not able to really acclimate to the way that the Black man was treated in the South. It took him over a year to make his way to New York, and he was not really prepared for the cold winters. Did not have enough money for clothes. So you're right. He enlisted in the army, thinking he'll have at least a bed or something like that, and get away from the cold. And then he feigned mental health issues to get out of the army and got a medical discharge.
8, yeah.
So I thought that was great.
He was very serious about his roles and his role as a Black man in Hollywood and film, and he did not take parts, or was not allowed. He did not allow himself to be portrayed in the stereotypical step and fetch it, button roles type things.
The one line out of any of his movies that still resonate with me was they call me Mr. Tibbs, and just I can just see it in my mind's eye, the way he stood, like the just the emphatic way that he said it, the way he stood, like he believed in that line.
But that
And
that
in the way,
movie, that movie and its sequels were all already in the mid '60s and '70s. He won his Academy
yeah, I know,
Award
but
with Tony Curtis for The Defiant
right,
Ones in 1958. He had worked with a veritable who's who of Hollywood at
yeah,
that point. Uh,
I know, but that's the out of all of his movies, that's the one line, that just really stuck with me. Just, and I think it's not the line itself, it's how he commanded the line.
yes, yes. I find it remarkable that one of his famous roles is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. That was
Yeah.
already 1967. He was the number one box office draw in 1967 to Sir with Love, In the Heat of the Night, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I believe it
Yep.
was In the Heat of the Night that launched Mr. Tibbs, and then went on to
Could be.
and then went on to play. A couple of years later, they did a sequel. They called me Mr. Tibbs, and then did another
Right.
one. And I think those were already by the early '70s. But '67, he
Did
was the leading box office man. Uh,
did you know that in his younger days, because you would never know from the movies, that he was first rejected for acting because of his accent?
yes, and that was I alluded to that
So
earlier. Did you see how
yeah,
he learned to both? As a matter of fact, he failed his first audition because he couldn't read
yes,
the
he did.
script properly. So did you see how
Yeah,
he
his
learned to read?
reading, because of his education and how he had dropped out of school, he couldn't read, and his accent was very
A
poor.
Jewish
And
waiter in New York spent weeks with him reading the newspapers and discussing the news stories,
oh,
which taught him
okay,
how to
I
read.
missed. That's cool. I
Yeah.
had missed that part. I had read that he well, two things that he did was just a real detriment to his commitment to wanting to obtain his goals. He would spend hours listening to the radio, just sort of practicing how to speak, and and practice orating. And he went back, he went to the original place that he went to, was the Harlem American Theater, where he had been rejected. He went back there, offered himself as a janitor. He worked for free in exchange for acting classes. And there was one night where they were putting on a student production, and Harry Belafonte had the lead role. And there's a name too, right? And he got sick one night, and they allowed Sidney to step up and substitute for him and stand in for him. And lo and behold, it's that story where there was a prominent person in the audience and loved him, and gave him a little job in a production. He offered him a small role in an all-black production of the ancient Greek comedy Lysistrate, and the rest is kind of history. So he after that, he was offered larger roles, and that led him to his illustrious career in the movies.
I'm gonna want to come back to Harry Belafonte in
Okay.
a couple of minutes. To go back to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. It's
Yeah.
On one hand, it's disheartening, the idea that you could build an entire mainstream Hollywood picture about the idea that a black man is married to a white woman. That's
Well, that goes back to that whole time, that whole period of time where civil rights was a big part of our history.
The reality was, even by then in the mid 60s, interracial marriage was illegal in, I think, 17 states in this country. I don't know if it was being enforced at that point, but maybe it was. I actually do know that's about the same time, 1966, 67, it'll be 66. My mother had spent time, about 3 weeks in the hospital. And after she came home, she invited one of her roommates to have lunch at our house. And I remember that day she telling us, oh, by the way, because, I was 7, my brother was 5.
Right.
She was white and the kids were black, or she was black and her kids were white, because she was in an interracial marriage. And
right.
I probably hadn't seen that, at the time I was 7. So my mother wanted to make sure we were aware of it, and that is all cool. But it's just insane to me that would be so, I remember Love American Style. They
sure,
analyzed it by, first she comes home with a gorilla, to make it acceptable that she's going to date a black guy. Because first she introduces her father to a gorilla that she's dating. It's just,
I mean, it's interesting that even today, it's almost even more relevant that people of color, parents of kids of color, still have to have that sort of talk with them. I remember I wasn't much older than you when I got my first sort of clue. Right? You have to kind of, this is how, if it's not handled the right way, this is how prejudice is spread, right? It's not something you're born with. So in 3rd grade, I had a teacher I fondly remember who is what we call mulatto. She was from a biracial marriage, and she was dark, not very dark skinned, but brown. She was brown, and she looked different than all the other teachers. And so, my mother wanted to make sure I understood why, and that, that I should still respect her and not treat her any differently. And it was sort of an awakening. You grow up on Kings Highway, you don't see a lot of people of color,
Well, we were in that first generation where black kids were being bused into our schools. So we had, 6 or 7 black kids in each of our classes or something along those lines. I didn't get any sense that it was disruptive, in any way. It's just, I didn't realize it was a thing. It was just the kids, but
yeah, I mean, I remember seeing them come off the bus, but I didn't realize the relevance of it.
It impacted Poitier's career because he wouldn't take parts that he considered that placed, a black person in a bad light, but he then got accused of playing the same role over and over again.
That was also sort of the sign of the times too. He had to be very selective. I mean, even, which is the movie where, was that not Room 222? I'm thinking of a movie where he played a school teacher.
Blackboard Jungle. I think he was a student in Blackboard Jungle.
Right. And when was he the teacher? Well, that was To Sir with Love, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I sort of am remembering a scene where I guess he was fired or something happened, and he came out on the steps, and I think that's right before his students saw an injustice, and I think that was right before the song "To Sir with Love" was sang, and it was a very important scene, and it really was written to really make an impact on how society views people. It was another. Now that I'm thinking of it, it was another kind of role that he played that impacted how I perceive people.
Now,
He's,
you mentioned Harry Belafonte, and
yes,
probably some of the more successful people uh, crossing over into mainstream entertainment, for lack of a better word, not black
right,
exploitation, not black only, would be Sammy Davis Jr., Harry
right.
Belafonte, Poitier, and then eventually Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, by the way, was the first co-star of a mainstream network show, and I Spy, and played a part
Right.
where race wasn't a factor. But he was the first black man to co-star in a
It
network
was
show.
more about his job as a spy.
Right. But putting
Yeah.
aside, he's one thing Harry Belafonte and Poitier have in common are Caribbean, Jamaican type roots, as
Yes,
opposed to
I agree.
Southern black. And I wonder if that set them apart, different style of speech, a different, what do they call it?
The
Non-Ebonic
cult,
type speech, different
right? The
culture.
right.
I,
Yes.
I, I, I
Oh,
do,
it's interesting. You used the word bubonic.
I,
Uh,
I do seem to remember, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but I do seem to remember that there have been points where Caribbean black-skinned people, dark-skinned people don't associate themselves with American Negroes in the same way. Almost a separate kind of class struggle. Better than, we didn't grow up with
oh,
slaves type of thing.
kind of like the Spanish see themselves as better than Puerto Ricans, sort of
That kind of
thing.
thing. That kind of
I
thing.
got you.
But yet Harry Belafonte, my mother probably had a major crush on Harry Belafonte. He definitely crossed over, had a huge mainstream, cross-cultural audience. Uh, and Lenny Bruce did a bit where he said, I don't care how bigoted you are, if you get an opportunity, you can spend your life with, I think it was Diane Carroll or someone like that. Or
Oh,
you could,
she's another one. Yeah.
or you could spend your life with Kate Smith. I don't care how prejudiced you are, you're going to pick Diane Carroll every time over Kate Smith. That type of thing.
Yes.
Harry Belafonte crossed over. Poitier crossed over. And they all worked together several times. One thing Poitier did for others that he couldn't, for instance, he directed Stir Crazy with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor.
I remember that movie well.
And you take a movie, characterization that movie probably couldn't be made today. You had Gene Wilder in blackface, so it was part of the storyline.
Oh yeah, that would not go over well with our Black Lives Matters type.
But there were,
people.
Richard Pryor was playing Richard Pryor. Gene Wilder
Right.
almost playing, a ghetto version. So, I just think it would get way too many objections to everybody.
Oh, it would no, it's one of those things like, cancel culture type thing that's going on.
But in that respect, the parts he couldn't take, the parts he wouldn't take, he definitely, had people in those roles in other things that he was behind the scenes on. But then, he did continue to work, and he he worked with Dan Aykroyd and Robert Redford in Sneakers. I remember that. It was some sort of spy thriller. I didn't remember he was in the remake of Day of the Jackal with Richard Gere and Bruce Willis.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did you realize he also portrayed Mandela?
I couldn't think of anyone better to portray Mandela than him. He won his Academy Award, as we were talking about, in 1958. The next black actor to win it was Denzel Washington in 1990.
Yeah, he's another really good actor. We hadn't seen him in a while either.
But definitely owes. I mean, I think, I don't think there was any doubt the legacy of Poitier for black entertainers and black,
there is no there. I mean, he's kind of the Rod Carew of the entertainment industry.
Another Jew. Told you that Jews are going to be a theme today.
I don't see a path. I really don't see a path that is as early as it took going forward if it weren't for Sidney Poitier.
Well, he walked a tightrope because race was a key component of each of his parts.
Yeah.
I was just trying to think. One of the other things that we mentioned, I Spy, for instance. Although,
right,
if I remember correctly, I Spy, the conceit was Bill Cosby was Robert Culp's like caddy or assistant, and a lesser, subservient to the white man.
Second banana.
Yeah, but
second banana.
Although they were his role was second banana, not the part. In other words, his part was equal, but he was playing somebody who was subservient. So that, I guess, could have been a black-white thing. But other than that, I don't think it was very dependent on the race of the actor. Most of Sidney Poitier's parts, the fact that the character was black was a key part of the character, obviously. And
again, that has to do with were those roles with I Spy, was that in the same era?
Yeah, that was
as it was
early mid 60s to very early 70s, I believe.
Really?
I believe I Spy probably, I didn't look it up, but I'm guessing it probably came out 67, 68. Cosby was pretty well established by 65, 66. I first became introduced to him in 68. But he was around. I mean, the Cosby Show, where he played the gym teacher, was probably 70, 71. Fat Albert, the cartoon, I want to say was.
That's where I was introduced to him.
So
with the
I
Fat
Spy,
Albert.
I'm guessing if we look it up, I Spy was probably 66.
Yeah, I think I saw Fat Albert before I saw I Spy, and Cosby really didn't hit me the same. I mean, he's funny, and all the pudding commercials and whatnot. And certainly this no recollection of the pudding.
Cosby. Cosby was such an icon for me.
Absolutely. I mean, again, cancel culture. It's like I still watch when I see the Cosby Show that he did with Felicia Rashad. I still watch it because it's still funny and it's still poignant and it's
I want to let
and yeah.
Okay.
But we don't want to get sidetracked with that. But
my guess
I don't
we're
think
going to be able to do a whole show on Cosby sometime in the next couple of years. Isn't that terrible to say?
Maybe. Yeah, he's not a healthy guy. But getting back to Sydney. Yeah, getting back to Sydney though. you know, and again, not realizing it when you're young, when you're looking back in retrospect, his body language spoke volumes with the way that he took on each role.
But
There was
that leads us to Lonnie Guinier, who was a civil rights attorney, a law school professor. She was nominated by Clinton to be, I believe, assistant district U.S. attorney and attorney general, assistant attorney general. She dealt with a lot of the same things in the same way as Poitier did.
can I just
Yeah.
go back before we move on for 1 minute? There was a quote that I found by Sidney that I felt important, and we kind of passed over it. So I just wanted to get that in there before we move along. It is his quote. In my first experience in front of the camera, my first experiences on stage was a totally dimensional awareness of life. All of what I feel about life, I had to find a way in my work to be faithful to it, respectful of it. I can't play a scene that I don't find texture of a humanity in the material. And I just felt that just really relates to what I was trying to point out about his stature and how he took on a role. So I just wanted to get that in there
That's
before we
actually
move
pretty
along.
deep. I'm glad you shared that. Lonnie Guinier, and again, okay, here, look at this. She was born. Her parents, biracial. Her mother, Jewish. Her dad, born in Panama to Jamaican parents, which goes back to what we were just talking about with Poitier and Belafonte. Right. Her mother was a civil rights activist.
I thought it was her father. Her father was a lawyer and a union organizer and a real estate agent, and the mother was a public school teacher.
Well, they both probably were involved. Yeah, he was national, both members of the Communist Party in Hawaii back in the 50s or 40s. So that's interesting as well. She was ultimately raised in Queens. She moved to Queens when she was young. When she was nominated by Clinton, ultimately the Republicans mounted a campaign against her, calling her a quota queen, implying that she was being given the position as a token to bring in a black woman.
And Clinton backed down.
Well, yeah,
he ended up withdrawing her name.
Yeah, it was complicated. They found quotes that she had made in the past that could be misinterpreted about black voting, and it's funny right now. For instance, you're seeing the controversy about redistricting, where districts that have a heavy black population, yet they're drawn in such a way that they're going to be almost certainly represented by white Republicans. And she had written on the idea that black populations should be able to have black representative, which was considered controversial. It seemed like she is being twisted to say she was saying only blacks can represent blacks.
She actually is one of those names that we talked about at the top of the show. She's a name that is not a household name that should be a household name.
Absolutely.
In what she accomplished. The thing that I had looked at, excuse me, it's interesting that when you research a person's life, how their life sort of reminds you of things that other people are sort of picking up the mantle and reading about. So when she had her name withdrawn, it actually led her to speak out on gender and race equality and pointing out democratic decision making. She wrote a series of books that unveiled her views and comments to social justice and political participation in America. And just in her fight for to revoke, how do I want to say that? She was wanting the Black to have equal rights in their voting and in the South, and that sort of led me to Stacey Abrams and what she's doing now.
That's the tightrope she walked, because her whole life, a lot of her accomplishments, a lot of her achievements, people were kind of saying, oh yeah, it's because you're Black, you were given special privileges because you were Black, you were admitted to this school or whatever because you were Black, when she absolutely earned them entirely on her own. Yet she realized that throughout our society, people of color were being disadvantaged and deprived of the opportunity to achieve some of the things that she did. So she fought for those her whole life for those rights and some sort of way of balancing the scales, while resenting the fact that she was being treated as somebody who was a quota queen, who was
not worthy. Not worthy.
You wouldn't be here if you weren't Black, type of thing. And I could see that resentment. I could see that eating at her and her family.
She was a graduate of Harvard Law, and eventually ended up working her way back there as a professor. So what I found interesting about that was by being able to become faculty of Harvard, she kind of combined both of her parents' positions, her father as a union leader and her mother as a teacher. And she petitioned when she was there, and when she was at Harvard, she, as a student, petitioned the establishment of an African American Studies program, which later ended up being headed by her dad. And during the 1970s, she was head of the Voting Rights NAACP Defense Fund. And she helped with major victories in voting rights for Alabama, which was what I had said reminded me of what Stacey Abrams is now doing. And she became the first Black woman to become a faculty member in Harvard's history. So that's all really profound, I think.
It's interesting and sad to the degree to which the fight is still being fought and has to be fought.
It's almost like we took two steps back, with this whole Black Lives Matter. I mean, when President Obama was elected, it really felt like there was a giant leap forward, and now, unfortunately, probably mostly due to the fact that Trump became our president, we've taken a lot of little steps backwards. So, it's.
No, I'm going to disagree with you. I think more light was shed on it during Trump's presidency, but it's something that has existed. And for instance, the talk you alluded to earlier. I mean, I have friends who have to teach their children, their children of color, something completely different in how they,
how they
handle
address.
themselves if they get pulled over by a cop. But I never had to have that talk with my children.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yep.
I have a
Yep.
friend who was eating an ice cream cone in his car in front of an ice cream parlor, but because he was sitting in front of this ice cream parlor for about 20 minutes in his car, it was deemed suspicious, and he ended up face down on the pavement with his ice cream cone
Wow.
on the ground while he was searched and frisked. Because why would a black person be sitting in front of this store for
Oh, that was the whole search and frisk. Was that during the search and frisk era?
Yes, out here in California.
Wow.
It was out here in California, and it's probably only about 15 years ago. You talk about all the high profile killings, and yes, they are a small percentage of the stomps, but at the same time, it is only happening to people of color. You can't point to, the white examples of people pulled over for traffic stops who end up dead, who end up with the cop on there leaning on their neck for 20 minutes. You can't point to the white examples.
Or there was a I don't know if you heard about it out in California, but there was one gentleman, I believe he too was a student or a teacher, and it was a Sunday, and he was just going for a jog in Central Park, and he came across this woman walking her dog.
Of course.
And you heard about it?
Oh yeah, that was a big story.
Yeah. He like had the withal to turn on his cell phone and record the whole thing and watch this woman fake being harassed by him and calling the cops and so on and so forth. And, she was, and what a gentleman. I mean, he didn't even, he dropped the charges.
Yep.
Like he let her go. He just really wanted, I don't think so either, but it just shows you he didn't want anything from her. I mean, you're hoping that something like that made the circle, on the internet and whatnot, and gain some national exposure, that it wakes some people up. They go, oh, maybe I haven't been looking at this right.
Yeah. By and large, I don't know. There are many, 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 many examples, and way more examples probably of cops going out of their way to be good to people, whether they're black, white, Chinese, whatever.
Right.
But all the examples of these stops that turn into deaths because the person grabbed the cell phone the wrong way or something like that are exclusively people of color. Whether it's 1/10 of 1% or 1/100th of 1% or 2%, whatever it is, the only examples are people of color. I remember having conversation out here. There was a Vietnamese woman who was probably bipolar and didn't speak English, and her family called and she was having an episode, and she refused to drop a knife, or rather like a Ginsu type knife, and she ended up getting killed. And
wow,
people use that. Well, see, there was this story. I said, well, yeah, that was 20 years ago, and that's one. To come up with the examples of blacks being killed during traffic stops, you had the guy who was licensed to carry and told the cops he was licensed to carry, and his girlfriend was taping it in from the back of the car, and they shot him to death, and he did nothing. You could point to 10 of those every year. You don't have to go back 20 years to find the one Vietnamese woman.
For every story we hear, there's probably tons of more to go with it.
And I guarantee you, if there were stories involving white people to any quantity, they would be being made public by the Fox Newses of the world, by the idiots like Tucker
Right.
Carlson, because they would want to be able to show the counter uh, to the Black Lives Matter stories. But Guinea,
Right.
I feel bad for her because, like I said, she had to battle this perception of being handed things her whole life, handed things that she legitimately totally earned, while at the same time fighting to address that very imbalance that we're talking about now in a dramatic fashion. You know, because what we're
Right.
talking
Well,
about in terms of Black Lives Matters and police are things that happen in employment and even healthcare and all sorts of aspects of life, you know, that she was trying to help change.
well, she did sort of help change that. She authored a series of books that unveiled her views about um, social justice and political protocol in America. She won awards. She won an award in 1995, the Margaret Brent Women Achievement Award from the American Bar Association. One that sort of raised my eyebrows was the Rosa Parks Award from the American Association for Affirmation Action. Certainly, when you're speaking about uh, black people of color and black lives, um, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. are certainly names of notoriety. So the fact that she's even in any way associated with names like that speaks volumes, I think.
So as we wrap up part one of our second episode of Over the Rainbow, we're going to wrap up talking about two losses in football after
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know all that much about football. As I had stated before, other than walking in and out of the room while Dad was watching football.
there's going to be, I mean, we started with John Madden last week, and now there's going to be some weird coincidences today as we talk about the loss of Don Maynard and Dan Reeves.
Yeah.
Maynard was primarily known for his career with the Jets, but he started with the Giants in the like 56, played for a couple of years, including in 1958, what's known as the greatest game ever, which was a losing game in the championship. But a couple of things that they both have in common is they were both involved with Frank Gifford, who we talked about briefly last week.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yeah. Well, it's all New York, right? It's they were both involved with Jets and or Giants football, and so again was Frank Gifford. So
true. Maynard came up with the Giants. He actually ended up leaving the game and getting cut, and then rejoining with the upstart American Football League, the Titans that became the Jets.
Correct.
Played for the Jets his entire AFL career until the leagues merged.
So I know from my own research, he was considered a wide receiver. When we get to baseball, you won't be able to shut me up, but I'm not, other than like a quarterback, I'm not really quite sure what a wide receiver does. I know that football's broken up into defense and offense. I'm assuming the wide receiver is offense.
Yeah, he's one of the pass catchers. So Joe Namath obviously was the quarterback for the Jets and most famous for the 1968 upset against the Colts, considered the first major upset in the Super Bowl. I don't even think it was called the Super Bowl yet. And Maynard was one of his primary pass receivers.
Right.
Caught about a third of his passes and a good chunk of the yardage.
Well, they're saying this guy was flat out as fast as lightning. He was very, very quick, referred to as lightning in a bottle, and very much respected by players such as Namath, who said he could flat out play. Held the league record in 1973 for yard receivers, 11,834, and amassed 10,000 yards receiving before any other pro player. So another thing I had read was, he said that records are made to be broken, but there's only one person that gets to do it first. So he was pretty proud about that.
Yeah, he was a wide receiver. He was also running back. He was pretty strong on yards from the line. In other words, carrying the ball on running plays as opposed to pass plays. He was it him?
He led the Jets to winning Super Bowl III.
He was one of the key players. Ironically enough, he'd been hurt for the Super Bowl, so he was on the field, but he did not end up with any passes. Although, if you see, I'm not that much of a student either, but sometimes having a primary receiver, acts as a dupe. So other players are free. Other receivers would be free because he wasn't getting the ball, but he did not actually statistically have a significant role in the actual Super Bowl.
Okay.
To go to Dan Reeves for a moment, he was a player, had a very long playing career as well as coaching career. When he came up, he was part of the Giants team that included Gifford and was coached. Two of the assistant coaches were Tom Landry and having a moment there, Vince Lombardi.
A senior moment. We're getting to that age, Mark.
Yes, I know. I know. Vince Lombardi is probably the most legendary football coach of all time, I would think. And Tom Landry, of course, led the Cowboys for many, many years, was an icon to himself. So Dan Reeves becoming a coach in his own right was one of the most successful failed coaches, if you will. He probably went to the Super Bowl as many times as any other coach without ever
9 times. He went to the Super Bowl 9 times. He was ranked 10th all time in wins and reached the Super Bowl 9 times. He played for Dallas, the Dallas Cowboys, described as a hard-nosed running back, and then coached for the Denver Broncos, the Giants, and the Atlanta Falcons. And he led the Broncos to 3 AFC titles and took the Falcons to two Super Bowl championships, I think.
Well, no, he had won as a player and he won as a coach, as an assistant coach.
Oh, that's
but he
pretty
never
cool.
got a ring as a head coach. Probably the greatest disappointment in his career. He also hasn't been elected. Maynard was put in the Hall of Fame, which surprised me after about a 10-year career. It looked like 10 or 12 years.
Reeves is not in the Hall of Fame.
He's
right?
not. Now his record is as a coach is 190 versus 190 over 165 with 2 ties. So and 11-9 in the postseason. So I guess that's longevity wasn't enough, and just getting to the game isn't enough.
How about that?
Although it may happen eventually. I have a hunch it probably happens eventually. It just didn't happen.
The veterans, do they have like in the football? Do they have like they do in baseball, like a veterans committee? Like it's sort of like their last shot.
No, I don't know when the eligibility ends. I doubt that eligibility is over for him. They have different protocols. It's not as regimented as baseball.
Okay.
So
Well, I know he retired in 2003, and he had a bit of a battle with dementia, which is I think probably harder on his family than it is on him. When you have somebody you love like that, not being able to recognize you, it's hurtful. I know. I briefly experienced that with my Aunt Mary. Um, she was battling the dementia, and she looked up at me, and she thought I was her eldest son's girlfriend. I was only 13. So I was just she apologized afterwards. There's really nothing to apologize for, you know. She she was a good lady. So you know, I have just an inkling of what it's like to live with somebody who is dealing with that disease.
I'm not sure to what extent now that they're looking at football and brain injuries and things like dementia
Mhm.
as a byproduct of the game. You would have to think that
Oh, it's interesting
that might have contributed. Yeah, several players have donated their brains to medical science for autopsy to be
about
examined
that.
for that reason.
Right? Wasn't didn't something happen with Herschel Walker and that sort of injury? Was it Herschel?
He had some domestic violence, if I'm not mistaken, issues in his
Oh,
past, which will come out as the Senate race heats up in Georgia.
mhm.
But there have been a couple of players who've committed suicide that have been found to have,
Right.
and some serious crimes that have been found to have brain injuries related to football. So, uh,
Yeah, you know, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, when they're running that hard into each other, how can your brains not get a little scrambled, you know?
yeah, yeah. Uh, I don't know.
Same. And you know, in one way, you know, you know, you asked the question, which sport is the most dangerous? I happen to think it's ice hockey, but a lot of people do feel it's football. Um, I just think, you know, you're running full out, you're putting your whole body, and you know, these guys are built. It's like if one of them slams into another one, I would think it would feel like you were just hit by a Mack truck.
Oh, they've certainly gotten larger and larger over the decades. So,
Yeah.
uh, I would think football is more dangerous long term than hockey. Although I don't know if either of them compare to boxing. Um,
Well, that's a good point too.
I don't know. I don't know. But we're kind of getting off track a little bit, I
Back
think.
a little bit, yeah.
I think a little bit. We will be continuing. We'll be wrapping this episode of Over the Rainbow up, but we are going to do a second episode this week, where, among others, obviously, we will feature Bob Saget and his impact on entertainment and life
Right.
in general. I'm looking forward to that. So thank you all for listening. If you have feedback, please, you can message us. Probably the easiest thing is to message us on Facebook. There's an on the mark over the rainbow page on Facebook. That's probably the easiest way to weigh in. And we will pick this up
And
again later on. Yes.
yeah, we definitely would love to hear from you all too. No, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Sharon. And we will talk again soon. This is
All right.
Over the Rainbow podcast. Mark Silverman, Sharon Yankowitz. Thanks for listening.